No fancy intro this time, we're just going to get right into it. At the end of last year, I passed 70,000 subscribers here on YouTube, which is amazing. It's been a bit of a whirlwind 7 years and it's kicked my ass a little bit, but here we are. We did it. I've never done a Q&A before, not in a formal way in a video like this anyway, and this seemed like as good a time as any to celebrate this milestone. So thank you to everybody who submitted questions. Yeah, let's get into it. Celebrate 70,000. Hey heroes, I'm Josh from Panels to Pixels, and you've got Qs, I've got As. Let's get started. So first off, Ryu Washua on Instagram asks, what was the first ever exposure you had to the superhero genre that made you become a lifelong fan? I had a few variations of this question and the next one, so I'm going to try and group them all together. But my first exposure to the superhero genre was, as it was for a lot of people of my generation, is cartoons and toys and video games. Yeah, growing up in the 90s, it was Batman the Animated Series, X-Men the Animated Series, and probably my favourite, Spider-Man the Animated Series. Yeah, I was well into Spider-Man the Animated Series, and he became my favourite superhero quite early on. Had a lot of Spider-Man toys and things. And then obviously from that, I recognized those characters and wanted to play the video games. We had a Sega Mega Drive in the house when I was a kid. I remember playing the Sega Spider-Man game as a kid. That was an early one. And then later on, never saw Spider-Man, obviously, but I was into comics by that point. Yeah, by the time those early Marvel movies started coming out, like X-Men and the first Spider-Man, I was already well into comics at that point, which brings us on to the next question. At Spider Guy on YouTube asks, what was your jumping on point for comics? Yeah, so being aware of all those comic book characters through the cartoons and the toys, and also Batman Forever, I didn't talk about that, but that was a big deal for me as a kid. But yeah, I went looking for comic books. I wanted to get to the source, I suppose. And also in the UK, I think we had, especially at that time, we had the kind of unique viewpoint on comics maybe, because the Beano and the Dandy was like big. I think most kids read the Beano and the Dandy, and I think that's something I've never touched on in my videos before, but I think that's really crucial to priming me to read comics, because I take it for granted that I can read comics, that I know how to read comics, how the panels work, and to read top to bottom in each panel and things like that. But that is something that you have to learn as a kid, I think. So yeah, I read a lot of the Beano and the Dandy when I was a small kid, and it was a natural progression once I started getting interested into superheroes to superhero comics, which brought me onto a weird coincidence, I suppose. In my parents' garage, there was a stack of Marvel comics, 80s Marvel comics that I found. These are two of the original ones that I've kept hold of. And I think they belong to my older brothers. I've got two quite older brothers, although I've since asked them about that and they were like, no, we didn't leave any comics in there. So I don't know where they came from, but they're just, through divine intervention, there was a stack of 80s Marvel comics. And these were the first American superhero comics I got my hands on. And yeah, so we got some Marvel 2-in-1 from the early 80s, like Bronze Age. And we have late 80s Mark Gruenwald Captain America. And this was a favourite of mine because it was like the black cover and it just looked kind of edgy. This was not the Captain America that I'd seen in other places. So yeah, there was a bunch of other stuff as well. I think there was like an Avengers anniversary issue, probably Avengers 300. It was one of the first American comics I got my hands on. And from there, I would just pick them up, like kind of in charity shops or in newsagents. You just occasionally find old comics. So the first comics I read were 80s comics. And then eventually, because we're in the 90s at this point, I would find new comics. Or in Europe, there's a company called Panini who do reprints of American comics and stuff like that. So I would find, this 90s stuff. There weren't any comic shops around where I lived. I think comparatively, there's very few comic shops in the UK compared to the US anyway. And there weren't any near where I lived, or if there were, I wouldn't know. I didn't even know what they were or where to find them. So eventually, I think we went abroad to Spain, and that was the first time I remember seeing like current issues on newsstands. So I grabbed a load of those, and it was around the Heroes Reborn era, so we're talking like 1998. I remember like the Kurt Busiek and George Perez Avengers was like a big deal for me. That was like my introduction to the Marvel Universe at the time. And then also the like Howard Mackie, John Romita Jr. Spider-Man issues. And then later Avengers Forever as well, still Kurt Busiek. Yeah, and I just grabbed whatever was out that week and that kind of set me off. Then I was like, right, I'm going to try and keep up with these stories, and I later found like specialty shops and things like that. Insane Ian on YouTube asks, loving your look at what specific comic issues inspired each MCU film. How far into the MCU do you plan on going with this series? Insane Ian, long-time commenter on my videos and a comedy musician. I think I filmed something for a music video you did a long time ago. But thanks for the question. Thank you for saying that about the MCU comics that inspired the MCU videos. I really enjoy that series, so I'm glad that people seem to like them. In terms of how far into the MCU I'm planning to go, basically, I'm only 2 in so far, but I want to finish phase 1. That was my goal with it. I was like, if I can get phase 1 done, get them in a playlist, maybe edit it into one longer video as well to put out. I'm not thinking beyond that, because if I think about doing all, however many films there are now, 30 odd, I'll just crumble. So phase 1 is the plan at the moment. And also, once I've got phase 1 ticked off, I'll feel more comfortable saying, like, the comics that inspired Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy, or the Fox X-Men films, or whatever it might be. At 36greygross on YouTube says, hypothetical scenario, you walk into the Marvel offices and they give you carte blanche to do anything you want in a miniseries. Who do you write and what do you do? Yeah, so I had quite a few questions about, whether I have any ambition to write or draw a comic myself. And I've got to be honest, I really don't. I really love comics, but I have other creative outlets, and creating my own comic is never something that's really appealed to me. That may change in the future, to be honest, because the more time you spend with this stuff, the more story ideas you start to cook up and the more kind of vocabulary you have to be able to create something. When I was a kid, I really wanted to draw, and I learned to draw through comics, but I don't think I ever really wanted to be a professional comics artist, certainly. However, if I did find myself in that situation where I had to write or draw a miniseries at Marvel, or maybe, the question is just, what would I commission at Marvel? I suppose the obvious answer would be something Hulk related. I feel like that's the story that I'm most familiar with in Marvel, and I feel like there is still, Al Ewing with the Immortal Hulk has shown that there's still, so much untapped there. Not that I would want to follow that, or the current Incredible Hulk run, which a lot of people tell me is very good. So yeah, let's say I do an Incredible Hulk miniseries. At forgive me, JDKCICNSNO on YouTube asks, do you prefer the child-friendly Marvel or closer to R-rated Marvel? And the answer to that is, obviously it depends on the story. I'm not dogmatic enough to say that it has to be all one thing or all the other. In terms of my preference, I gotta say, R-rated Marvel, it wouldn't be my preference, because I feel like there is a tendency, if you go with like an R-rated superhero story or like an adult-oriented superhero story, you throw out all of the things that appeal to me about these characters, all the colourfulness and the campiness and the earnestness and the sincerity and the hopefulness and the optimism. That tends to go out the window. Not always, but it tends to go out the window when what if Superman was evil and said the F word? So my preference, I guess, yeah, family friendly. At Holmes1508 on YouTube asks, only answer the one you choose. What is your favourite film, TV show, album, song, or piece of art that is absolutely not related to comic books? Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to answer them all. I'm going to do a speed round. My favourite film is Halloween, the original John Carpenter's 1978 Halloween, just masterpiece. My favourite TV show is probably White Lotus. Like, I was blown away. I don't watch that much modern TV, but we watched White Lotus and I was just like obsessed with it. Yeah, really love White Lotus. Favorite album, this could change on a day-to-day basis, but my gut right now is telling me Kid A by Radiohead. Is that a bit of a cliche? I don't know. I don't care. I remember listening to the album for the first time in college, the first time I listened to it in full, and just being totally transported to another world. It was like a religious experience, and I can still go to that place whenever I listen to it now. So that's a really special album to me. Favorite song? I don't know. Do you know what's an absolute? Wichita Lineman by Glenn Campbell is a banger. I was going to say Toxic by Britney, because I think that is one of the most incredible songs that's ever been written. And my favorite piece of art, this again might be a bit of a cliche, but it's for sentimental reasons. My parents had a print of, I think it's called Liverpool Quay by Moonlight by John Atkinson Grimshaw. They had that hung in their house. I think they still have it. So whenever I see that, I feel it feels like home to me. And also it's just super atmospheric, really cinematic painting. I just feel like I could step right into it. I love that. At Hayabusi Pod on Twitter asks, why did you cut your hair? And at Daiji on YouTube, I'm so sorry about the pronunciation of these names, asks, your hair always looks nice. What's your hair regime? Well, thank you. I included these questions as a bit of a humble brag, but why did I cut my hair? Well, I grew it out. I was growing it out up to and including the COVID lockdown, and then it was just a matter of, well, I can't get it cut. I'm not going anywhere anyway. So I just grew it as long as I possibly could. It makes me cringe a bit now when I look back at some of those videos, like the Hulk Future Imperfect video. I look like an Afghan hound. I just have this horrible mane of frizzy hair that's like all the way down to my chest. And then I had it cut a little bit shorter and it was fine. But ultimately I decided, I didn't need to keep it long to be rock and roll. I could have a short corporate hairstyle and that's fine. I just wanted to change. I'm quite impulsive with my appearance, to be honest. I went peroxide blonde at the beginning of last year. That was fun. And one of my favorite comments I got on one of my videos said, why do you look different in every video? Are you in witness protection? I thought that was quite funny. In terms of my hair regime, well, this also relates to why I got it cut. It is a lot easier to style my hair to make a video now than it used to be. It used to add like 30 minutes onto the process of washing, drying, styling. When your brain is full of all the things you're about to say on camera and you're thinking about setting up the mics correctly, setting up the lights, setting up the video, whatever. So that was another reason why I cut it short, because it makes making videos a lot easier. My hair regime is pretty simple. I keep it clean and I like a matte putty or a matte clay. I use like a really cheapo VO5 one here in the UK. It's just matte clay. But hey, boring hair talk aside, this is the thing that I want you to take away from this. I firmly believe, and I have believed this for at least 10 years, that the two of the best things you can do for your mental health is wear good quality shoes and find a good hairdresser who you trust, or a good barber. I'm not saying it's a cure-all, obviously, mental health is very complicated. I know that better than anybody, but there have been times where I've been at my lowest and I've gone and got my hair cut, and at the very least I just feel a bit lighter coming out. So hey, look after your hair, look after your head. At Spider Red Hood on YouTube asks, what is your favourite comic run of all time, or favourite creative team? Favourite comic run is a bit tricky. I'm going to go favourite creative team. Tom DeFalco and Ron Frenz. Everything I've read of theirs is like a hit for me. So I think they have to qualify as my favourite creative team. And, in that respect, I guess their run on Spider-Man, I think, is super underrated in the 80s. You get the introduction of the black suit. There's just some interesting stuff there going on. Peter's relationship with Mary Jane really evolves in that time, and that sets up for the marriage. So yeah, let's say that. At S9TV on YouTube asks, have you read all the comics you cover on your channel, or do you just do research on the book when needed? Yeah, that's a really good question, because without defaming other comic book channels, there are some channels out there who put out so much content on such a regular basis that you do wonder, when do they ever get time to read this stuff? But that's none of my business. Yes, I do read everything that I talk about in my videos, and the truth is, it can go both ways. Sometimes I'll read something and I'll be inspired to then make a video about it. Or sometimes I'll be like, I want to make a video about this thing, and then that gives me an excuse to read it. Or if it's more of a subject, if I want to make a video about a certain subject, I'll go and track down the issues that relate to that subject and read them. But I always read them, because at the end of the day, I'm doing this for a love of comics more than anything. I just love reading comics, and this job gives me an excuse to read, think, and write about comics all day, which is very nice. At TZWHI 1667 on YouTube asks, what's the best era of comics? From your videos, I'd say 90s, but maybe nostalgia is wearing off. Yeah, so watching my videos, you probably would assume that I'd think that the 90s were the best era of comics, but I don't. I love the 90s, and obviously that's the era that I started reading comics, so they'll always have that nostalgic pull for me. but I absolutely don't think they're the best era. Another reason I really focus on 90s comics in my videos is because I want to try and change the perception a little bit, or just, you know, add a little counterbalance to the narrative around 90s comics as like total horseshit. But if I'm being honest with you, I think that the 80s, you know, absolutely outshine the 90s in almost every conceivable way. Yeah, the 80s is my favorite era of comics. Before I started Panels to Pixels, I actually ran the Marvel in the 80s feed on Twitter. Oh, those were the days when Twitter was good. Yeah, I ran the Marvel in the 80s feed. 80s Marvel, you know, those were the first comics I ever read, and I've read a lot of 80s Marvel, and that's really where I think they were at their kind of creative peak. So I'd have to say the 80s. At Justins4215 on YouTube asks, who's your favourite D-list comics character? I'm talking low, like booster gold level relevance. Well, I suppose the obvious answer here is Morbius. I don't know why, I just really love Morbius. I love the character. You know, even before he became a meme, I was like, you know, in Morbius's corner. Who else? I'm a big fan of Longshot, and that's mainly because I'm a big fan of the artist who created him, Art Adams, and also Ann Nocenti, the writer who created him. But I also just love that world. I love the Mojoverse. I love how kind of weird and kind of out of Marvel it feels in a way, and how alternative it felt for the time. So yeah, I'm a big fan of Longshot. On the DC side of things, I really like Bizarro. That's probably not a surprise because he's like a weird monster guy, and that's my thing. Recently, I've weirdly been drawn to Hawkman comics. I've been collecting a lot of Hawkman comics. I don't know why, just something about the design and, again, how kind of esoteric and weird the lore around Hawkman is appealing to me. At JackRain5 on YouTube asks, what 90s comic book arc would you like to see adapted into a film/TV show, and who would direct? I've mentioned this before in videos, but I think Hulk Future Imperfect is a gift to Marvel Studios. You know, it's ready to go for the MCU. They're set up for it perfectly, and if they're not actively working on it, I know there's some, you know, muddy water around the Hulk distribution rights, but whatever it takes to make a Future Imperfect story, because they've got the MCU's Hulk is currently in the kind of Professor merged Hulk mode, and just all the pieces are there for them to do something that's, you know, full of fan service, because they love doing that, but it's also so far in the future that it's kind of removed from all the rest of the inner workings of the MCU at the moment, and, you know, it kind of relates to multiverse stuff. Yeah, Future Imperfect. In terms of who would direct it, bring Ang Lee back. Let's get Ang Lee's Hulk 2, baby. At Spiderus Prime on YouTube asks, did you read any Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comics? I've read some Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I've read some of the early Mirage Studios stuff, but not really. I really feel like I fell through the cracks with the Ninja Turtles because I was too young when the original show was out and the original toys, but I was too old by the time the 2003 reboot came around. So I was like right in that middle bit, which there was other stuff to fill that gap. We're going to talk about it in a minute. You know, that doesn't stop me from going back and enjoying the comics, and I certainly enjoy those early Mirage comics, but I'm not like a die-hard Ninja Turtles fan or anything like that. I tell you what though, I do at some point want to make a video about those weirdo Ninja Turtles comics published in the 90s by Image Comics, because it relates to the kind of stuff that I talk about on the channel, and also those comics are just nuts, like completely bonkers. At StokeTube on YouTube asks, what's the hardest thing about making videos for you, and do you have any techniques for making it easier on yourself? That's my good buddy Matty over on Stoked on YouTube. Go and check his channel out. If you like my channel, you will almost certainly like his channel. In fact, you might even like it a bit more. What's the hardest thing about making videos for me? The writing stage is the hardest mental hurdle for me. That's the bit I really have to take a run up at. And sometimes it feels like running into a brick wall. That's the bit that slows down the production of my videos. Like the editing, I think I'm probably an above average paced editor, and I'm able to do some pretty, you know, slick things with my videos, but the writing is just a massive emotional drain for me. The second part of that question was, do I have any techniques for making it easier on myself? And one thing I've tried to implement with every video I've made since the very beginning is to try and do something new for myself in every single video. And this is advice I've given to others as well, because one, it makes it interesting for yourself. Two, you're challenging yourself creatively, which is the most important thing on this platform and in any creative endeavor. And also, you know, it's how you learn and develop. So that could be an editing technique, or sometimes I'll do a filming technique, you know, light some B-roll in a way that I've never done it before. And with writing, you know, I'm always trying to challenge myself to tell a story in a different way, or to approach the writing in a different way. I try to incorporate doing more unscripted stuff in my videos, one, because it speeds up that video production process, but also because it means that every single video is a challenge, because you really have to be, you know, on it. At Thomas Gordillo Real 5841 on YouTube asks, are you going to do a video on Street Sharks? Right, I'm making a promise right now. 2024, 30th anniversary of Street Sharks. Hell yeah, I'm making a video. I'm going to become the #1 YouTube influencer on Street Sharks. I want Mattel to be sending me those 30th anniversary toys to review. We're going to make the whole channel about Street Sharks if I had to. Well, maybe not. But yes, I absolutely want to make a Street Sharks video. This year, I'm really focused on doing more 90s action cartoon stuff. I've done videos on the 90s Marvel cartoons, I've done videos on X-Men and Spider-Man. This year, I want to branch out into some of those other things I love that aren't necessarily based on comics, but some of them quite often have comic book tie-ins as well, which I want to talk about. So we're talking Street Sharks, we're talking Gargoyles, Biker Mice from Mars even. As I mentioned earlier, I am in that micro generation that didn't have the Ninja Turtles. So for me, it was Street Sharks, it was Biker Mice from Mars, it was SWAT Cats. Not really. So yeah, hold me accountable. I want to make the best Street Sharks video on YouTube this year. At Gol_9 on YouTube asks, when the f*** are you gonna make an Immortal Hulk video? That's how I read that comment anyway. Very aggressive at Gol_9. Immortal Hulk. I haven't finished reading Immortal Hulk. I have all 4 Omnibuy volumes behind me, and I was working through it during the pandemic, and it just got to a point where it was so much existential dread and cosmic horror that I had to put it aside. It's also just one of those comics that just makes you feel a bit grubby all the time. So I put it aside, and I put it aside for too long, so now I have to go back and read it from the beginning again. But at some point, I will finish it. I loved everything I read. I think I got up to I think I got exactly halfway up to issue 25. So I'll go back, revisit it, and yeah, maybe there'll be an Immortal Hulk video in the future. Other people have dealt with it much better than I could, I think. And also there are other Hulk stories that are more personal to me that I would want to cover before then. But we'll see, ultimately. At Akashic Moon on YouTube asks, which superhero or supervillain do you identify with most and why? Yeah, so speaking of Hulk, this one is obvious if you've seen my old Toxic Masculinity of Hulk video. I really found something around that time in Bruce Banner and the Hulk. You know, it's not necessarily that character was intended to represent things like, for me, it represented things like panic disorder and OCD and stuff that I've struggled with. But, you know, I was able to, it's malleable enough that I was able to form that around my experiences. And yeah, I don't know. It's quite hard to talk about without getting emotional. But that's the character I identify with the most. Just having this thing that lives inside of you, and there is always, you know, kind of a threat to you that you have to learn to live in harmony with. And it, you know, when it does take over, you're at the mercy of it. And yeah, oh man, let's not get into this too much. Maybe I'll make another video about this, because in that video I was kind of vague and alluded to the idea of, you know, the Hulk represents mental health struggles, but I wanted to keep it open enough that people could relate to it. But for me, it represents something very specific. Yeah. At Nirvana Phoenix on YouTube asks, who would win in a fight? Whoever wins, we lose. At MadDog7365 on YouTube asks, Maximum Carnage? To which I say, not now, Maximum Carnage. At Batman is Scared 4341 on YouTube asks, honestly, I just wanted to congratulate you. Not now, Maximum Carnage. Oh yeah, now that I think about it, will you ever finish the Maximum Carnage video? First of all, I love that people remember this really unfunny recurring joke from like 5-6 years ago in my videos. So thank you if you've been watching all that time. The truth about the Maximum Carnage video is that it just got too big for me. I stumbled backwards into a fact about the old Maximum Carnage video game that I don't think anybody else knows, or very few people know, and most of the people who know are people that I've since told about it. And I ended up like conducting interviews with people who worked on the game, and worked on particularly the music of the game, and it was like the first bit of proper journalism I did when I was only like 1 or 2 years into doing YouTube. So it kind of got away from me a little bit, and then I kept putting it away, thinking I'll get to it eventually. And then I lost interest in video games and the channel moved in a different direction. But maybe now the idea of the Maximum Carnage video is better and bigger than the actual Maximum Carnage video could ever be. Or maybe one day I'll make the Maximum Carnage video, it'll be the last thing I upload, I'll sign off and you'll never hear from me again. At Nick_261 on YouTube asks, maybe a weird question, but is Panels to Pixels an actual team, or is it just you? That's not a weird question, and it's actually a really good question. No, Panels to Pixels is 100% just me. I've thought often whether I should be drafting in editors or even writers that would be more helpful to speed the process along, but one, I'm a total control freak, and two, I just enjoy not just being involved in every part of the process, but having complete control over every part of the process. So no, it's just me. In the early days of Panels to Pixels, I would sometimes do social media posts and say like, subscribe to us at Panels to Pixels, or we just uploaded a new video and stuff like that. And I did that because I saw, bigger brands, bigger kind of entertainment outlets doing that. And I thought that was what you had to do to appear professional. Don't do that. If you're a one-man team, fucking own it, man. Like, it's the best thing in the world is working for yourself, because I've done it both ways now, and I'm not knocking anyone who works for somebody else, but yeah, if you're a one-man band, own it. It's great, and I'm proud that every single thing you see on this channel is 100% my handiwork. I suppose the only other person to shout out is my wife, Hannah. She won't watch this, but she's helps out a lot with things, whether it's just listening to drafts of scripts, giving me feedback on ideas, just putting up with me when I'm in the middle of a 14-hour editing spiral. So yeah, love you. At Jim Garcia 9824 on YouTube asks, would you consider doing videos about independent comics that are not part of Image or small publishers like Valiant Comics? And the answer is hell yeah, I'd love to do that. It's a difficult thing to weigh up because I think that my subscribers are looking for a certain thing, and also, I only have the capacity to make so many videos. So I tend to focus on the big stuff, and, at the end of the day, the stuff that I'm most passionate about is Marvel, DC. But in my last video, The Weird World of Gimmick Covers, I got to talk about Valiant Comics a little bit, and that was really good. I really admire Valiant. They're like the superhero universe from the 90s that kept being a superhero universe. Image had to diversify, and it's had various kind of identities over the decades. But Valiant, they've kind of stuck to their mission statement. But at the same time, Valiant doesn't feel regressive. It doesn't feel trapped in the 90s, and it certainly doesn't represent some of the more negative values of 90s comics. So hey, I'd love to talk about Valiant Comics more. I also know that Valiant, being a smaller publisher, work with smaller comics creators here on YouTube and in other places. So if anybody from Valiant is watching this and wants to work with me, let's do it. At Blaze_Panther932 asks, what's your opinion on the Star Wars Black Series figures? Yeah, so I've got a little bit of a Star Wars Black Series collection behind me, and this is one of my newest collections. I started picking these figures up last year because they were so cheap, frankly. They were getting heavily discounted at a lot of retailers here in the UK. And initially I just picked one up out of curiosity. I got Greedo first. And I gotta tell you, man, I really liked it. Like, I didn't think I would ever get into 6-inch Star Wars, because prior to that, I'd only ever collected Power of the Force as a kid in the 90s, and then as an adult collector, I'd picked up a handful of Kenner, like vintage Kenner Star Wars. And so I see a lot of people in the toy community saying that, that 3.75-inch scale is part of Star Wars' legacy. And I get that, but everything else that I collect, every other modern line, is 6 or 7-inch. And to me, the Black Series just represents the ultimate versions of these characters. And in a weird way, it feels more like a natural evolution of the Power of the Force stuff from the 90s, whereas the vintage collection, I guess, is more an evolution of the vintage Kenner stuff, which really doesn't belong to me. That's not my generation at all. So yeah, as a 90s Star Wars kid, I really like the Black Series. I kind of get the sense that the line isn't as healthy as some people would like. But I'm just picking up kind of Cantina aliens, Jabba's Palace denizens, and also I got the Jar Jar Binks. And speaking of being a 90s kid, that figure is phenomenal. That really was the thing that sold me on the Black Series. At Cool Comic Art on Twitter asks, who are your all-time favourite comic book artists? Great account, by the way, Cool Comic Art on Twitter. They've always been really good to me, shared my stuff, and I very much appreciate that. In terms of my favourite comic book artists, let's do a Mount Rushmore. I was talking about this to someone recently. Let's do Mount Rushmore of comic book artists. For me, it is Jack Kirby without reservation. Probably Frank Miller. I have to say, the 90s obsessive in me has to say Todd McFarlane. He's one of my favourite artists to collect. I've probably got more Todd McFarlane single issues than any other artists. And for the last one, I'm tempted to just go absolutely wild and just say someone like Bill Sienkiewicz. Bill Sienkiewicz is an artist who I'm just like so drawn to their work, and it's obviously so unique and so unlike anything else that it's hard to even put him in the same category as all those other artists. But there is something about it that speaks to me. So yeah, that's a bit of a weird four, but let's say it. Kirby, Miller, McFarlane, Sienkiewicz. Somebody also asked me, but I can't find the question now, so I apologise. But someone asked who is my favourite underrated artist, or who do I think is the most underrated artist? So I'll include that as part of that last question as well. I have to say Michel Fiffe, the artist and creator of Copra, his independent work, and he did the 3-issue Bloodstrike revival at Image Comics. He's done work on Superman. He did a short story in the anthology series Superman. Is it just called Red, White and Blue or something like that? Phenomenal artist. He is my favourite current working artist. He's one of a small batch of current artists who I'm just like, really love and try and collect all their work. He's up there with like Daniel Warren Johnson is another current artist who I'd really love their work. So yeah, Michel Fiffe is probably my favourite underrated artist. At The Leftist Cook on Twitter says, what, in your opinion, are the defining characteristics of the 90s era comic book animated adaptations? Hi Neil, thanks for your question. This is something I've been thinking about a lot recently because I'm working on another retrospective video of 90s action cartoons, not necessarily just the Marvel cartoons, but incorporating, like I was saying earlier, stuff like Gargoyles and Street Sharks. To me, when I think about that era, there's something that sets it apart from like post-millennial kind of stuff, and there was this weird like gothic or horror or supernatural, I suppose is the best way to put it. There was this supernatural element to everything, and I suppose over the years that's been replaced by a technological element to everything. If you watch like a Spider-Man adaptation now, there's very much a focus on technology, whereas in the 90s series, it was very much about like people turning into weird creepy monsters and a full moon over New York and stuff like that. Yeah, there's definitely like a supernatural undercurrent to everything from that era. Take Batman the Animated Series, for example. That kind of crashes the crime noir kind of gangster stuff against all this like body horror and gothic and bats and stuff like that. Obviously bats, it's Batman. But yeah, I think the supernatural element is the key component, and that really appeals to me. Obviously being a big horror fan, that's kind of my avenue into a lot of this stuff. At Diego Reviews on Twitter asks, if you were to time travel back to the day you decided to start making videos, what advice would you give yourself? That's Diego Reviews on YouTube, another good mate of mine. Go and check his channel out. It's a good question. What would I tell myself? My gut instinct here, this is an answer that I think some people won't like, is I would go back and tell myself not to make any video game content, which, is easy to say in hindsight. And at the time, I think I was able to grow the channel by making video game content. But as my interests have shifted, it's been very hard for me to get out from under that. And it's taken me 2 or 3 years. Maybe if you're only a recent subscriber, you won't get a sense of this. But it's taken me 2 or 3 years of really like numbers dropping off on the channel to be able to like build up a foundation again of like, these are the type of videos I make. I make videos about superheroes, I make videos about cartoons and comics and sometimes video games, but I'm not just a gaming channel. And I've got a bit of a chip on my shoulder about this, so I apologize if you're like, oh yeah, whatever, cry me a river. But for so long, people would introduce me on things. If I went on a podcast or whatever, they would say, video game channel, Panels to Pixels. And it was just nails on a chalkboard to me, because in my mind, Panels to Pixels was so much more than that. And it was just, of all the things that I'm interested in, video games are right at the bottom of that list. There's so much stuff that comes before it. Anyway, so I suppose knowing now in hindsight how difficult it was to get away from people's perception of me as a video game channel, I suppose one of the things when I first started the channel was I thought that comic books were too small a niche. And also the channels that I watched most at the time were NerdSync and Owen Likes Comics and guys like that. So I thought, well, they're doing that. They've got that covered. And it didn't occur to me that I could also make videos about comic books, which is so foolish in retrospect. But it didn't occur to me that I could do it. And also I felt, well, I'm never going to be as good as those people. I felt like an imposter because my scope of what comics were was so limited to like one or two eras of basically Marvel comics at the time. So I thought, what's my in here to YouTube? Well, video games are the biggest thing on YouTube. Maybe if I combine my love of superheroes and video games, mash them together, I'll be a megastar. And I certainly found some success with that. And also it was at a time when other people weren't really doing that as much. A couple of years into that, IGN had a whole, department practically devoted. Once Insomniac Spider-Man came out, if you go back, it's unlisted now, as are a lot of my gaming videos, but if you go back to 2017, I did the first upcoming Marvel and DC games of 2018 video, or whatever it was. That got over 1 million views because there just weren't that many people talking about it. Which is not to undermine the people who were there talking about it. There was, Xavier, Godzilla Mendoza, he's been doing this way before I was. And there are lots of great channels who were talking about it. But it felt like a much smaller niche with bigger potential. But I kind of feel that I got a little bit pushed out of that scene as like Spider-Man came out and there was more buzz around these kind of games. And eventually I realized that being the biggest, most successful YouTuber didn't matter to me, and what mattered to me was making videos that I'm passionate about. And it's a bit sad that it took me a few years to realize that, but I did eventually realize that, and was able to focus on just talking about comic books and things that I loved. So long rambling answer, but if I could go back, I would probably say, yeah, maybe cool it on the video game stuff. But I suppose more positive answer to that question is advice that I would give to new YouTubers, which is just to really enjoy that first period of setting up a channel, and getting started, learning how to do it all and stuff like that. It can feel quite demotivating, I think, when you're trying to get those first 100 subscribers or people aren't watching your videos, but that's the most uninhibited you'll be in the video making process. You'll just be making whatever you want to and trying lots of different things, and it's before the algorithm has grabbed hold of you and said, this is what you are. You've had success with this video, so that's the video that people want from you for the rest of time. So yeah, I would also go back and tell myself, just enjoy those beginning bits. Don't get frustrated that you're not growing as fast as you want to, and just enjoy making videos, not having writer's block, learning how to use your camera and doing all that stuff, because that's when it's most fun. And finally, @RavensFilm on Twitter asks, are there any things from 90s comics that don't seem so rosy to you now in retrospect? My camera battery just died on this last question, so forgive me. It'll have to be a phone camera from here on out. But yeah, it's a really interesting question, 90s comics. Certainly as a proponent of 90s comics on the internet, I think people have made certain assumptions about me, maybe about my political beliefs or, what kind of a person I am. Definitely in the comments of certain videos, I've had people accuse me of being a bigot or whatever because I'm into 90s comics, and I hope that's plainly obviously not true. But yeah, I fully acknowledge that there's a lot of problematic stuff in 90s comics, just as there is from any era of the past, and just as there will be from this era, believe you me. But yeah, obviously the depiction of women is not ideal. The kind of gay panic that pervades every comic from the 90s, and just the general lack of diversity in the comics industry at the time. there are problematic elements to the 90s. There's lots of stuff that doesn't seem rosy to me now. But at the same time, there is something really radical about 90s comics. It was the uprising of all these fringe cultures, and like independent comics and stuff like that really came into the mainstream in the 90s. And with that came some progressive values, maybe not represented in all the ways we would have liked to have seen them now in hindsight. But, you know, there were more queer creators in the 90s. There were more people of colour creating comics in the 90s. So it was happening. So, yeah, it's a difficult one to answer because as much as I've kind of tied my identity to 90s comics, at least here on YouTube, I hope that people would see that it's not my entire identity. And you know, let me say it here, because I haven't, you know, stated it as plainly anywhere else. If you're following me and you're comics gay and you're following me because I talk about 90s comics and I talk about how much I love Rob Liefeld and how much I love Todd McFarlane and all this shit, I love it because it's camp, right? I love it because it's big and bold and bombastic and fabulous. I don't love it because it doesn't have women in it or it doesn't have people of colour in it or whatever fucked up reason you love the 90s comics. So if you're following me for those reasons, sure, watch my videos. I'm not going to stop you from watching my videos. But I think you've massively misunderstood the point that I'm trying to make. So yeah, I'll get off my soapbox now and stop virtue signaling or whatever. Look, I don't want to end this on a sour note. Let me say thank you to everybody who submitted questions for this Q&A. I wanted to answer as many of them as possible. I wasn't able to answer them. I put out the call for questions and boy, howdy, did you all answer. So I really appreciate that, genuinely. Thank you so much for getting me to 70,000 subscribers. I feel 70,000 is close enough to 100,000 that I can now publicly start talking about the road to 100,000. It feels close enough that it's achievable, but it still seems so far away that I need your help. So subscribe to Panels to Pixels here on YouTube if you haven't already. Yeah, thanks for watching my videos. I make these. I would make these if nobody watched them, but it means the world to me that people seem to like them and do watch them. So yeah, until next time, stay safe, and I will catch you in the next video. Bye bye.